Okay, and a warm welcome to all of you. This is our first Re-Betchworth Zoom meeting for 2024. I hope the first of several. And we picked the topic of birds, obviously, because January is the month of the RSPB Great Big Bird Watch, which I think I'm right in saying is the largest wildlife survey in the world. And I was checking today, and there's over 300,000 people signed up for it for this year's survey between the 26th and 28th. So towards the end, then I'll just mention that again in the hope of being able to encourage some of you to join in. Since the last Zoom meeting we had, we've set up the WhatsApp nature group, which I think is working really well. I'm delighted that so many people are joining in with the idea of surveying what sorts of birds we've got in Betchworth. And at the last count, I think we had about 52 species identified. But an interesting fact here is that there's 144 species recorded for the area, which is 5 kilometers around Box Hill. So we've got quite a few more species to find before we can say we've done a good job, as it
Come across.
Yeah. So this session then today really is for people who are just becoming active and interested in bird watching. I know that some of you are enthusiastic, have been doing it for a long time, and will have a lot of knowledge to share. But for people like me who are only just, I'm ashamed to say, getting interested in bird watching, then I think this talk is for you. And I'm really pleased to be able to invite Peter to join us this evening. Peter was at pains to stress that he's not an ornithologist. He's not an expert. What he is a very keen gardener and a very keen bird watcher, which he's been doing for many, many years. And he's also the Surrey ambassador for the British Ornithological Trust, which you might say a few more words about in a minute. So he's fulfilling that role tonight as ambassador, going out, explaining to people what it is we might see if we look into our gardens and what sort of bird species we might find, and help us identify those bird species. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Peter, give him control of the screen, and make him the host, as it were.
There's always this pregnant pause now. Well,
there always is, yeah.
Whilst this, yeah.
There you go, Peter. You're the host.
Right. Okay. So let's share screen. Can everybody see that? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. Now, as nobody's supposed to reply to that, as we're all supposed to be muted, but we'll carry on anyway. Okay. We call this, after a bit of discussion with Norm, we call this bird spotting, rather than create a rather grand title. What I'm going to try and cover in what for me is a relatively short period of time is a little bit on being prepared, what we need to think about in terms of looking for birds, some identification tips on some of the more common birds, particularly.
What do you think that is?
I want to talk a little bit about the BTO Garden Birdwatch scheme, which you may or may not be familiar with, and finish up with a little bit about how you might, if you wish to, attract birds into your garden. We're hoping to leave sufficient time for a bit of discussion and questions. So let's get started. Being prepared, I think the first thing you need if you're going to try and observe the bird life in your gardens or anywhere else in the countryside is a good pair of binoculars. I expect that those who are keen have already got them, and maybe you've got some very sophisticated equipment. A decent pair of binoculars means one that you can afford, I guess. And a good place to go and find binoculars is an RSPB site. There's one at Brooks, for example, where you can actually pick up different sets of binoculars and try them out in real life and see how they work for you. The next thing you need is a good guide for identification. The one I've got is the Collins guide for
Well, I think we've got
British
that one.
Birds, yeah, and it's an excellent book in that it not only provides individual bird identification, but it's got a lot of information about comparing bird species, tips as to what to look for, the morphology of birds, and that sort of thing. So it's very useful. Another thing that's quite handy as an alternative to that for if you're wandering about the countryside, the Field Study Council do a whole host of guides. The laminated sheets, which are quite handy to take out. Oh, very handy if you've got children who
We got that one.
rather messy. Yeah. Excuse me, would you mind just going on mute, please? That would be good. For the during the presentation. Yeah.
I thought we were going to all be muted.
Well, could you mute yourself? Do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, that'd be nice. I don't mind. But we've got a fairly short talk, so we're going to try and do the questions at the end. Yeah. Okay. Or if you're internet savvy, well, the RSPB website is a very good source of information. I think if you're new to it, like I was 30 years ago, then it's a good idea to spend time observing the common species, what I call becoming familiar with the familiar, or what the Collins Guide calls default birds. Being very familiar with the ones that are obvious, so that when you see something different, you spot it more easily. You could do that in your garden or in a nature reserve. And I don't know whether any of you have been, but there's a really nice little nature reserve at Warnham, just north of Horsham, where they have 2 bird hides overlooking bird feeders, and you'll see all the woodland species there. And it's a very nice little place. It's got a nice little visitor centre, and on the lake there you get the opportunity to sit in comfort and start to observe the birds on the lake, get familiar with the ducks, the cormorants, herons, and birds of that nature, which I'm not going to really spend any time on today. Behaviour is a very useful thing to think about when helping in identification, because often you can't see birds very clearly, but if you can see what they're doing, then that is handy. For example, if you see a bird going down a tree, it'll be a nuthatch, and if you see a bird going up a tree, it'll be a tree creeper. And that's the sort of behavioural type thing that you can start to look out for in some of the birds that you see. Early morning is generally a good time for observing birds because they're all coming out to feed. In the summer, that gets rather demanding because early morning's about 4 o'clock in the morning. But the dawn chorus you'll be familiar with. And what I found over the last couple of years particularly is that listening as well as looking is a very good way of understanding what birds are around. And I've got an app on my phone. I'm not a technical person really. I've only had a smartphone for 2 years, but I've got an app called Merlin on my phone, which you hold up and record, and it will listen to and tell you which birds it's hearing. I, for example, have never, as to my knowledge, I've never seen a chiffchaff, but I do know that there are quite a lot of chiffchaffs in the summer on Bookham Common because my app has picked them up. And other birds that are quite often difficult to see, like blackcaps, you only see a blackcap very occasionally, but they've got a very distinct song, and the app will pick them out, and you know they're about, and it gives you an opportunity to maybe search. I listen to the app, and my wife gets the binoculars out, and we try and find things. So that's quite useful. Be aware of migratory behaviour. There'll be lots of summer birds that you won't see next week. A lot of birds that aren't here. So there's no point in, if you think you've seen a cuckoo, although that would be rather surprising, well, it's probably not a cuckoo. If you've seen a warbler, it's probably not a warbler, because they're only here in in the summer. Conversely, there are now quite a few birds about that you will see in the next few weeks that are visiting or migrating birds that come south in the winter, and we'll touch on that later. Just go back one. One of the things that you may have read about that people are getting excited about at the moment, that this is a waxwing year. We've had a thing called a waxwing eruption, where waxwings, of which this is an example. Sorry, go back one. Come looking for food here because the food in Scandinavia where they normally feed has run out, and they occasionally come in large numbers. We may or may not see the odd one down here. They have been seen in the south of England. These flocks have been seen in places like Manchester. Just keep your eyes open. You might see a waxwing if you're lucky. If you are keen on, or become keen on, looking after birds, when you can do no worse than joining the British Trust for Ornithology. This is an organisation of which I'm a member. It's a small organisation, different from the RSPB in that it focuses mainly on research. It doesn't have any land or have any reserves. It provides detailed analysis of bird populations, which it supplies people like the RSP with, so that they can do the publicity stuff. It relies almost entirely on citizen science, and they've got 60,000 volunteers, of which I'm one. But they run courses on bird identification, and if you get very keen, that's something that's quite interesting. I've attended one or two. It's very useful for things like waders, and if you go to the coast where there's lots of little birds that all look the same, it's quite a good idea to have a bit of knowledge about it. My story on this subject started 30 years ago when we moved to our house in Bookham, and this appeared on our bird feeder. It's a greater spotted woodpecker, but I don't know. As you're on mute, I can't ask you the question, but it turned out when we scurried to our guide to check what it was exactly, this is a juvenile greater spotted woodpecker. Those of you who are keen will know. And it's part of the woodpecker family, all of which are slightly different. The juvenile woodpecker has the red patch on the top of its head. The male woodpecker has a red patch on the back of his head. And as is common with a lot of bird species, the female is slightly plainer and has no red patch at all, although the general plumage is the same. And this is one example of a dimorphous species where the male and the female are different, and there are quite a few of those, which make it sometimes difficult to identify. That's not the problem with our cheeky little very common bird, the robin. Everybody will be able to identify a robin, I hope. Its red breast being its main feature. And also, those of us who are gardeners will be familiar with the robin, that is one of the few birds that seems to be unafraid of human behaviour. And in fact, I was at Wisley on Sunday and trying to take a photograph of a robin, and it actually attacked me. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to get a video of the attack. Robins, on the other, are monomorphous in that a male and a female robin looks exactly the same. There's no way of distinguishing them. They're very territorial, very argumentative, and you will very rarely see more than one robin in your garden. If you see two robins, then they're probably male and female. If there are more than two robins, then they'll be fighting. And when you go out in the countryside, like I do on Bookham Commons, you will hear robins calling to each other, largely establishing their territories. And again, because of the red breast, when you see a little brown bird, we've got the little brown birds later, flitting around, probably quite close to you, then you will be able to quite easily see the robin, whereas you will perhaps not see other birds. Occasionally you will see one without a red breast, and it will be a juvenile. This is a juvenile robin. Sometimes you're lucky enough to see that. A rather scruffy little animal, but you can see its red breast is just about forming. One of the two, couple of the most common birds that everybody will hopefully be able to recognise are the blue tit and the great tit. But again, going back to my original point, if one can be very sure that one can easily identify these without thinking much about it, then that helps for future identification of other birds. And the blue tit, although it's blue, you very rarely quite see such a good clear view of that. They flit in and out of your bird feeders. If you're out in the countryside, they'll be flitting among the trees. And what's quite useful is to get an idea of the shape. You can see that a blue tit is completely different shape to a great tit, and slightly smaller. And if you observe them closely in your gardens, when you go out in the countryside, you'll get a better idea of you know which one you're looking at. And then when occasionally something else appears and then suddenly disappears, like that, which happened to us, you'll see another tit arriving at the bird feeder, and it's different. You've spotted it's different because you know exactly what these two look for. And this is a curl tit. I don't know. A curl tit is slightly smaller. It's got a slightly pink breast, and it's got this little white stripe down the back of its head. So once you've seen a curl tit, then you've got the identification in your head, and you will spot it the next time you see it. We probably had curl tits in our garden for quite a few, maybe a couple of years before we spotted the difference and realised what we were looking at. Another little tit that we see quite often is the long-tailed tit. The long-tailed tit, clearly its name is because of its long tail compared with its body. They're very small birds. They always appear in flocks like this, and very rarely do they settle. They will fly through your garden very quickly. They occasionally will rest on the bird feeder. If you're out in the woodland, you will hear them flitting, little squeaky noises. You will hear them flitting through the trees. And if you're quick enough with your binoculars, you will catch them, and they will move from tree to tree very quickly. So that's a case of where behaviour is a very good indication. Everybody will know a blackbird. That's a blackbird. But of course, the blackbird is black, but Mrs. Blackbird is brown. And so her appearance is similar, but not very much the same as other thrushes. A blackbird's a thrush. There are several other thrushes, and it's generally, if one looks quite closely, fairly easy to tell the difference between them. The song thrush, those of you who are lucky to see them, the song thrush is a declining species now in our gardens and in the countryside. Is a pretty bird, about the same size as a blackbird, but has a very distinguished speckled chest. A very close relative, the mistle thrush, is in gardens especially, is quite a rare bird now. And the mistle thrush is much larger than a song thrush, and it has a grey back as opposed to a brown back, and larger spots. And we'll have a chat when we get around to the chat bit. It would be interesting to know if anybody's seen one of these lately. Now we're in the winter, and if you're doing your garden, the bird watch, you're looking for birds around you at the moment, especially on a cold day, then another thrush that you might see is a fieldfare. We've not seen one in our garden this year yet. partly because we've not got any apples, so the fieldfare and the blackbirds love the windfall apples. But we were at Wisley at the weekend, and there was a flock of fieldfare at Wisley, and you may well have seen them in the countryside around where you are. And at the same time, another visiting winter visitor is the redwing. And the interesting thing about that is, well, going back to the fieldfare just briefly, you can see the difference between the fieldfare and the other thrushes. So it's fairly easy to spot. The redwing is named largely because of the red below its wings, but very rarely do you see that clearly. The significant identification for a redwing is this stripe on its eye. And it's very clear when you see, if you see a group of thrushes, mixed thrushes, then, or you spot one in your garden, you will see that stripe on the eye is the thing that distinguishes it. But interestingly enough, in the paper last week, there was this picture of a gang of people in Essex, I think it was, yeah, where this rather rare bird had arrived on our doors. It's called a water thrush, apparently. It looked rather like a redwing. So quite often you could be misled by picking the wrong bird. But if there's a very rare bird about, as you will see, then you will know about it, and there'll be hundreds of people there, all trying to observe this thing. The poor little bird must be frightened to death, I would have thought. One of the things that we can be quite confusing is that there are in our gardens and out in the countryside quite a lot of little brown birds. People be quite able to identify a house sparrow, I hope, and they've been they were in the decline. We get a lot of them in our garden again now. A similar bird that you might see is a reed bunting, and if you saw them separately, you would perhaps be a bit difficult in identifying them. But when you see them next to each other, that's very clear, is it not? But house sparrows are dimorphous. The female house sparrow doesn't have the rather grand markings of the male house sparrow. But if you look closely, the wings of the female house sparrow, the wing feathers look very, very much the same. And that's how I would tell I'd seen a female house sparrow, as opposed to a dunnock. My father-in-law used to call these hedge betties. Dunnocks generally appears in pairs in our garden. It's a ground feeder mainly, doesn't tend to go to the bird feeders, and it's got a grey head. Not to be confused with another little brown bird, which would be a female chaffinch. And again, once you see them all together and you've observed them, it's quite easy to tell the difference. But when it's a dark, cloudy day with not much sunshine and a little brown bird appears in your garden, then sometimes it's quite difficult. But if you've noted the specific identification pointers on these birds, then it's easier. A female chaffinch has this very clear white stripe here, which appears on both the male and the female. A rather dowdy bird compared with its male counterpart, the male chaffinch. It very much in decline. We only see them occasionally. You see lots of chaffinches, and I'll be interested when we talk at the end, if we've got time, as to how many chaffinches you will see in these days. The winter visitor that we might pick up coming south at this time of year, again, very rare now, at least in our part of the world, is a brambling, which is a member of the same sort of family. And again, now if you look closely at them, there's quite a lot of, they're quite distinct. They will appear together. Generally, you'll get a flock of chaffinches with 2 or 3 bramblings in them, if you're lucky. that used to be the scene 10 years ago, not so much now. The other finch that's used to be very common, and hopefully you still see them, we see them occasionally, is the green finch. The green finch is clearly identified by the fact it's green, and it has again a winter visitor counterpart that you may see. We've not seen one of these for some time. We've seen one at Warnham, I think, and you will see them in the countryside if you're lucky, and that's a siskin, very similar to a chaffinch, to a greenfinch, and its markings are very green. One of the things I had to do when I attended one of the BTA courses was we talked about seeing things in profile. Quite often, especially on a bright sunny day, you could be looking out and all you see is the profile of birds, and you can't even see the colours on them. So it's actually quite handy to get an idea. I'm not going to go through all these, but there's a very obvious one here, which is obviously and very clearly identified by its shape, and that's the wren. And you will you could pick them up flitting about your plant pots outside your. We see them flitting about the plant pots outside our kitchen window, but you only often get a glimpse as they move through the undergrowth and through the leaves. Very pretty little birds, and they've got a song that completely mystifies you when you see the size of the bird. You wonder how on earth they make that much noise. Conversely, another set of birds that you will all have probably seen all of are the big blackbirds. But again, they're all quite different. The crow is all black. The rook is clearly identified by this rather large white patch on its face and its beak. And the jackdaw is a smaller black bird, which, if you get it in clear daylight, is actually quite grey and just has a black at its nape there. A magpie is a pretty obvious bird to see with its sort of piebald look. These are all corvids, and of course there's one corvid that we could see occasionally in our gardens and in the woods, hopefully, which is completely different from all of those, and that's the jay. I don't know how many have seen jays. We get one occasionally in our garden, and
oh, there we are. That's it.
The way that you can spot a jay is this blue flash on its wings there. If you see a flash of blue going through a tree, then it's a reasonable sized bird. Then it'll be a jay. There's very few of the birds with the same sort of colouring as that. You will, I've no doubt, from where you all are, see quite a few birds of prey. The one that, whoops, oh, a minute. The one that's quite common now, is it not, over our countryside? We get them over the field behind us. We live, the field behind our house is the field that you see if you drive up. It's on the right-hand side if you drive up to Poles and Lacey. And we see red kites. We call them red kites, and they've got red, but this picture was taken on a bright sunny day. I think quite often when you look up into the sky, all you'll see is a dark profile. So the thing that distinguishes the kite is this fork in its tail, as opposed to this, which is the buzzard, which is slightly smaller, paler if you've got the colours, but doesn't have the fork in its tail. So the two large birds that you're most likely to see gliding above us, above the countryside in Surrey, will be either a kite or a buzzard, and the kite is easy to see. Other birds of prey that you might come across are the kestrel. Kestrel's clearly identified by the sort of browny back Again, if you can get the sunlight on it, it's smaller, and you'll often see it sitting perched, looking for prey. Whereas the other birds you will see more in the sky. And another common bird of prey that is perhaps the only one that will come into our gardens is the male, is the sparrowhawk. The male is clearly identified. It's fairly grey. There'll be a sort of a whoosh as it appears in the garden, and all the other birds will disappear. But the female sparrowhawk is a sort of browny colour and could possibly be mistaken for a kestrel. I'm just going to try an experiment now to show you if you one habit of the kestrel that makes it easy to see. All right. That's this is a kestrel, right? And that very distinguishing feature is the way it sits in the air and flaps its wings above its prey. And so if you see that, that's a kestrel. It's much smaller than the red kite or the it's flown away. It's much smaller than the red kite and the buzzard. And another bird that you might see flying in a similar fashion is a tawny owl. I've not seen one around here, but the tawny owl is the only owl really that you're likely to see flying about looking for prey during the day. Most of the owls are nocturnal, the barn owl particularly. You will see a barn owl if you're out in the evening, in the dusk possibly. And all the owls have this very distinguishing flat face, unmistakable as owls. So I've covered quite a few of the birds. I could imagine everybody sitting there, thinking they've seen birds that I haven't mentioned, and we can discuss that later. But I hope I've just given you a few tips on looking at and looking out for some of the more common birds we're likely to see. We can maybe pick up on ones I've missed out and some of the more uncommon, some of the less common ones. Given the time available, I need to move on fairly quickly. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the Garden Bird Watch Scheme. The Garden Bird Watch Scheme is what it implies. It's people looking at the birds in their gardens. What we do is we record the birds we see every week and put in weekly returns. It's been going now for over 25 years. These are the numbers of submissions that were made over 25 years. So you can see quite a large number. There's quite a lot of people around the country sitting in their kitchen windows observing the birds in their garden. And it's one of the largest long-term, it has the advantage of being a long-term study, and figures are created on a weekly basis. So the distribution of birds during the year is information that's generated. So typically, if we were to look at the redwing, then the records that I would be putting in for a redwing over the year would follow this sort of pattern. I'd be seeing them now in the winter. In the summer, I would not see any at all. And then my observations would pick up with a bit of luck in the late autumn. We've seen one or two redwing in our garden, but very few. Whereas the big garden bird watch that you're hopefully may participate in next weekend, I think it is, 28th, 29th of January, takes place every year at the same time. So it collecting data, which is very important on a year-on-year basis. Both this and the Garden Bird Watch are monitoring trends, but it's taken in January. So there will be redwings spotted by people doing the RSPB Big Garden Watch. If it was done in June, then there wouldn't be. So that's the difference. but as Norman was saying, the other important thing about the RSPB birdwatch thing is that a lot more people are involved, hundreds of thousands as opposed to thousands. And so the amount of data that's gathered is significantly more, and therefore it adds to the database for us to understand bird populations. The BTO Garden Birdwatch scheme that I'm involved in generates every quarter a sort of a pecking order, if you don't mind the pun, a list of birds and how many that have been seen. It has a notion of what it calls reporting rate, which is the number of gardens that the bird has been seen in, and this is the sort of pecking order. The most birds, interestingly enough, wood pigeon, blackbird, all the common birds that you would expect are seen in people's gardens. I put an interesting point down here is the greenfinch and the chaffinch are falling down this list, and we'll briefly touch on that shortly. Disease being the main thing. Wood pigeon we didn't talk about. Clearly everybody hopefully can identify a wood pigeon. Other similar birds, the collared dove, which was an introduced species a long time ago, is now well established. You can see them in flocks, but more often than not in our gardens we'll see a pair, maybe three. And a bird that we discovered fairly recently, again it's probably been around, we just haven't observed it, is a stock dove. We thought this was a feral pigeon like the ones you get in Trafalgar Square to start with, but it isn't. And we've seen pairs of these occasionally in our garden. It's smaller than a wood pigeon, doesn't have the white thing on its neck, and has a sort of a fluorescent sort of feathers around its collar. So they're the pigeons. My species list differs slightly from the BTO list for the nation, in that number 6 on our list is this. We could discuss later how many whether you see these or not. I suspect you do in Betchworth. The ringneck parakeet appeared in our garden about 5 years after we moved in. We only saw 1 or 2 of them. It's now the 6th most common bird in our garden, and the figures that we generate help the BTO create an understanding of the population. And these are the figures for the ringneck parakeet going back to the early 2000s. You can see how slowly the population has increased, but it hasn't increased everywhere. And another element of the information we're able to generate is the fact that they are concentrated in and around London, and that population has gradually increased, and they've appeared now in other of the larger conurbations. It turns out they like to be in areas inhabited by humans. They've not really gone out into the countryside, which is quite interesting. I've got friends in South Homewood who only see them very occasionally, whereas Denby's vineyard, I think, suffers quite badly from them. Whereas another bird that we now get very often in our garden is the goldfinch. Its name, of course, comes from the gold on its wing, but from an identification point of view, I think the red face is the thing that you would spot. We've got flocks of quite small flocks of goldfinches in our gardens, and it's one of the birds that has increased in its population over the years. And this is the Garden Birdwatch graph for the goldfinch, and you can see how this long-term study has been able to monitor the increase in population of the goldfinch. Conversely, the chaffinch we mentioned earlier has suffered a decline, as with the greenfinch has suffered a decline, as of the chaffinch. And the reason for that is they suffer from this horrible disease called trichomoniasis. And I've not seen one like this, but this happens quite often. and we'll come on, if I've got time before the end, to talk about briefly, if we've got bird feeders, then one of the things we must do is make sure we clean out bird feeders to avoid spreading this disease. So that's the BTO. You can join it if you wish. During lockdown, they started a free membership scheme where you just have access via the website. You can put in data online. You get a weekly online newsletter. If you're so inclined and are prepared to make a contribution, you can become a full member. And if you do that, you get a free book, which is another good book for identifying birds. And you get a quarterly magazine called Bird Table, which is very informative and gives you up-to-date information on all sorts of studies that the BTO are carrying out. It's not just birds now. They've joined forces with lots of other organisations, and we now record butterflies, for example. You can record all sorts of different things you might see in your garden and put in entries, and that's shared with all the organisations who are trying to gather that data. So it's quite a good, big citizen science project and quite enjoyable to participate in. So to wrap it up, what about birds in your garden? If you wanted to attract birds into your garden, how would you go about it? Well, birds are near the top of the food chain, so a garden that's got lots of insects, caterpillars, worms, slugs, and that sort of thing in it will attract birds. So it's not just a question of bird feeders; it's a question of what's in your garden for birds to eat. To attract wildlife in our gardens, this is really the subject of a complete talk which I give. We don't need to turn our garden into a wilderness. That's a myth. A typical urban garden, one that this is just a schematic of, might have a lawn, a pond, some trees, some shrubs, some borders, a patio, bird feeders. That typical urban garden can be more biodiverse. It's been proved than some natural habitats, and there's been quite a lot of studies to do this. So if you've got a garden, you've got wildlife. It doesn't have to be large. All our gardens connected together provide a good environment. And the sort of things that you need in your garden to attract wildlife are things that are not surprising and therefore fairly easy to provide. Trees and shrubs, you've got room. A pond, water is important. A compost heap, not just as a means of collecting up your decaying material. It provides a home for all sorts of invertebrates. I do log piles. Nectar-rich plants are important, and particularly those that flower throughout the season. We talked earlier. I talked to Norman about you're getting involved in wildlife meadows, and that's brilliant. But other flowers, we've got hellebores, for example, flowering now. They're not native species, but they're quite important in terms of providing some food for insects that might come on a warm day in the winter. Leaving seed heads on plants as long as possible, that's become quite a good, useful habit now, I think. And that's why, to a certain extent, the goldfinches have increased in numbers, because they love seed heads on plants. We leave our lavender seeds, lavender untrimmed during the winter, and we get flocks of, as we did the other day. There were 20, I counted 20 goldfinches on the lavender outside our kitchen.
Right, I didn't know that.
Last week. And if you're so inclined, this is quite contentious, I know, but an area of long grass if possible, and maybe a mini meadow. So that's our garden. It's got all of those things. We've planted trees. I mow the lawn where we walk for paths and leave it elsewhere. Got a bit of a meadow. Again, not to everybody's taste, but it buzzes in the summer. And this is a habitat for larvae, for butterflies, and all sorts of invertebrates and insects. And I could go on for quite a long time about that, but there isn't time. if you have bird feeders in your garden, several feeders is better than one. If you several small feeders rather than one big one is a good idea. Keeps the birds apart a bit. Place them near cover, away from the house if you can. The blue tits and great tits like to have somewhere they can go grab some seed and go and hide and eat it. Don't overfill the feeders if they're not being used. And big rule, please clean your feeders to avoid disease. If every time you have to, at least 2 or 3 times during the season, it was a good idea to completely empty your feeders and give them a good clean to avoid spreading disease. There's been a bit of a debate about whether it's a good idea to feed birds in your garden. Generally agreed that it is, but this is very important. And move feeders about to avoid the buildup of debris, so that discourages things like rats. Finally, if you do get involved in this bird watching business, well, it's a great thing to get the family involved and get young children and get the kids involved. That's me done, thank you. Okay. Norman?
Yes, thank you, Peter.
If I hope I've left a bit of time for some.
Yeah, we've
some
got about
debate.
10 minutes. Can you close down your screen sharing and we can?
I will do that.
Yep. Can I also?
Yeah, that was a bit of a gallop, I'm afraid, but I hope it's given people a bit of inspiration.
Peter, it was great and very informative and beautifully illustrated, and we really thank you for that. We've got about 10 minutes for questions, so I guess we throw the floor open. Can I just apologise first for not muting? When I handed over to you, I couldn't mute everybody.
No, that's all right. It didn't matter. It was fine. Everybody
Lesson
was
for the
very well
future.
behaved.
Yeah. So if you,
I mean, I'm sort of interested in birds that I haven't mentioned that you've seen, or questions on other things.
Okay, so questions and comments then for Peter. Just show a hand and we'll fire away. Sean?
You said about not feeding the birds close to the house, but I find if I don't feed them close to the house, all I get are magpies, crows, pigeons, grey squirrels. If I put the feeder right on the house, I get the smaller birds.
Yeah,
So
I think.
Why shouldn't I feed them close to the house?
Well, it's only just so that I mean, I think there's 2 things: so that you don't disturb them, and also there's a bit of a contentious point here. I actually saw a guy on TV yesterday talking about the bird feeders you can stick on your window. There's quite a bit of a problem with bird strikes on windows and things, and so that's the only reason for it. I don't think it's desperately important. And you're right. Sorry?
I'm glad it's not that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I should change my advice.
It's the only way I've found to feed the smaller birds.
Yeah, and especially when people have got small gardens, then we don't want to discourage them from trying to feed birds. No. Yeah, good point. Yeah, and I shall actually change my presentation accordingly.
Well, I've got the floor, a very quick question. We get lots of either crows or rooks or whatever. And there's a saying that says, if you see, what is it? Ed will do it.
More than one rook.
If you see them more than one, it's a rook. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think we see are crows, but we see lots of them. Looking at your pictures.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you do see flocks of crows, but in our gardens generally, you'll only see 1 or 2. Yeah. But the crows and rooks are very easy to distinguish because of that white mark. When we first started, we couldn't tell one apart. But that white, when you look closely, that white beak on the rook makes it very clear to.
Well, we got crows then in that case.
Yeah.
Can I butt in there?
Yeah.
Because we had crows and they used to wake me up at 4 o'clock in the morning
Yeah,
And what we do now is Ken goes out in the evening, brings all the bird feeders back in, and then takes them back out at about 7:30, 8:00 bed.
no, that's
Okay,
that,
can
well,
you
that,
get around here as well then?
that I was going to say you could provide a public
Absolutely.
service.
Good
there,
job
I
for
would
you,
have thought.
Ken.
That's pretty,
Yeah.
that's
It was a good
dedication
way of
to
getting
duty,
rid of the
that is.
crows
Yeah,
anyway.
it's true.
I thought you meant me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay, that's brilliant. Yeah,
If you get a
Yeah.
feeder with a proper cage round it, the crows, the magpies, they can't get at the food. It's an easy
Yeah.
solution.
yeah.
My crows don't bother the feeders because they know they can't use them.
No, well, we have the same, and
Different feeders.
Mm.
yeah, we've got feeders with
Selection.
rings round, but yeah, it's interesting. We don't have problems. We have a couple of crows every now and again. It depends where you live, of course, what problems you get. A lot of people have problems with squirrels, for example, which we don't have. But well, great. Don't tell my wife that that's expected of me, will you?
Okay,
Yeah.
Alan, your turn, Alan.
Peter, that was really insightful for a novice bird watcher like myself. A bit of a cheek, or I've got a request. Is it possible to get a copy of your slides? Because it's a lot to absorb, and going through it on
Yeah.
the time would be very
Yeah,
helpful.
I'm quite. I mean, I prepared them. I prepared that then. Well, a variation of what I do for this particular meeting. So I'm quite happy to let Norman have.
Yeah. So Norman, can you stick them on the WhatsApp site or email them or something?
I certainly can distribute them. Yes, we'll do. Yeah.
But if you get a decent book, that's the way to do it.
Yeah. So where do you sign up for the 17 quid bargain of the month?
Eh?
Where does one sign up to join?
If you go on the BTO website, British Trust for Ornithology website, you'll get all the information there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you go to Warnham, if you've never been, if you go down the A24, just where the new bit of road is, where the new traffic lights are, north of Horsham, just on the left there's a little nature reserve called Warnham, and it's really worth a visit because you can stand at bird feeders and see lots of birds that you would then be able to identify. Yeah, you see, for example, bullfinches and things like that. Which
and what was the name? I was writing it down. North of Horsham. What was the name of the actual place?
Warnham.
Warnham.
Warnham. It's the village there. It's the Warnham Nature Reserve. Yeah.
Warnham Nature Reserve.
£3 to get in.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
In fact, £3 to be a member. I think that's what we paid, something like that. Oh, 10 quid. Anyway, it's worth a visit.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a great place. Really
That's a
recommend.
cup of coffee by the sounds of it.
Yeah. It's nice. Yeah.
Any more questions? Okay, I've got a question, Peter, and it's what's the best way of finding out what has been previously recorded in our area?
What, in Surrey?
No, around where we live, around this area.
Well, you could, I would say, speak to the Dorking RSPB group. Yeah. Dorking's got an RSPB group that are very enthusiastic. I don't know any of them by name or anything, but they've got a website. And if you wanted to find out, what specifically you would see in your area, that'd be the nearest, I think.
Okay.
And the BTO would be able. The BTO only get down to sort of regional. Regional delineation, if you see what I mean. So I can look at what's been seen in the southeast on the BTO stuff, but I can't get as close as around Betchworth. But if you, so the thing is to go to the locals, yeah, and the RSPB local dorking group would probably be able to help you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that, Peter.
But I mean, as a general point,
Yeah.
all those things that I covered, you will see. And I don't know then what of course you've got the river there. We didn't talk about water birds. You've got the river there as well, haven't you? So you'll get herons and that sort of thing. But fairly easy to spot.
Yeah, we get the herons in our garden.
Deal.
Munching on the fish.
Yeah.
Alan, we're just coming up now to 8 o'clock, and I think if there are no more questions, we will. Yeah, go on, Jackie. Go on.
I just wondered, what if you're putting out bird feeders, what would be the best food to put in them?
Well, I think if you're only putting out one bird feeder, you can get a good general seed mix, yeah. Or if you just want to keep it simple, peanuts. Quite a lot of the tits and that will eat peanuts. If you want to give them a really good boost, something like fat balls, which give a lot of energy. So quite often it's quite a good idea to have 2 or 3 bird feeders if you can manage it, and put in, different things in each one. We put in sunflower hearts are pretty good as well. And what we discovered is sunflower hearts instead of sunflower seeds is probably the way to go, because the sunflower seeds finish up with seed husks scattered all over the ground, which then could attract unpleasant things like rats. So fat balls are a good idea, and you can get them at the garden centre, and you can get a container to put them in, rather like with a lid on it. Yeah. So that's probably, if you weren't putting anything else in, maybe fat balls are the thing, because they provide a lot of energy. Yeah. But again, if you look up in the RSPB website, there's guidance on all these things. So the RSPB website is the best site for guidance on all of these things, like how to feed birds, where to put bird nests if you want to put the bird nests up, and all of that sort of thing. They're very good on that. And if you've got access to the internet, then the world's your oyster, or your word's your blue tip.
Well, on that humorous note, Peter, thank you very, very much again for your great contribution. I'm sure we're all better informed now, and I think probably inspired as well to go and find out more and to be more active in watching our birds.
I hope you are.
Yeah, so just one reminder, we've got the RSPB Great Garden Bird Watch this weekend, and I'll put some information around on the WhatsApp group about that. And Peter, if you let me have your slides, I can also post a link to the slides as well.
I will do.
Again, thank you very, very much, and thank to everyone else for participating tonight.
And I might be in touch, Norman, about a contribution to the BTO. Yeah. As part of the deal. Yeah. Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Norman.
Bye.
Thank you, Norman.